From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. There was so much inspiring talk of shared American values at the Democratic National Convention here this past week. Whether that means faith in religion or deeply held secular beliefs, conversations far from the stage encompass these same topics and the way we each relate them to our democracy. Interfaith Alliance and its partners convened Promise 2025, a meetup of friends and allies to share the moment and for faith leaders and supporters to brainstorm how to foster a more inclusive democracy. You'll hear some voices from that gathering on this week's show, as well as conversations I was able to record with Dr. Eric Dyson, Representative Becca Balint of Vermont, Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas, and Christian nationalism expert, journalist Catherine Stewart. That's all coming up this hour. For the past couple years, it has been a joy to conduct so many memorable interviews with some of the great thinkers, strategists, and leaders of our times on The State of Belief. There's a lot to be learned and encouragement for these difficult times to be heard. It's also a way to feel less alone. So I want to make sure that you are subscribed to the State of Belief podcast at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform, or just visit stateofbelief.com/subscribe. That way you'll never miss a conversation, and you'll also have access to almost 100 past interviews with guests like Dr. Anthea Butler, Jeff Charlotte, Bishop William Barber, Rabbi Sharon Brous, Dr. Jamar Tisby, Rob Reiner, and many others. It would really help us to have you subscribe, rate, and tell people you're close to about all that you're hearing. The State of Belief is made possible in great part by the generous support of our listeners. If you've made a donation, thank you. You're helping get these conversations heard by more people who need them. If you haven't pitched in yet, information on how to do that is available at stateofbelief.com, and you can find out more about the work of Interfaith Alliance and join us at interfaithalliance.org. And now to some highlights from conversations I was able to have at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, Illinois. It was really gratifying to run into Dr. Eric Dyson, a familiar face on cable news, author, and academic, a professor in the College of Arts and Sciences and in the Divinity School at Vanderbilt University. He's also a Baptist minister and radio host. Let me just start by asking you, 2024, where are we? You know, I mean, when you think about the history, the trajectory of our country,
right,
you know, all that we've been through, and then, you know, I like to think of this moral arc.
Right.
And then sometimes you're like, wait, which way are we going? So yeah. I just want to get your broad perspective. We're here in Chicago, DNC about to nominate Vice President Harris.
Mm-hmm.
But where are we? Vis-a-vis religion, vis-a-vis race, vis-a-vis like a more perfect union.
Yes. No, first of all, it's a great honor to be here with you, a legendary figure of a legendary family. And when you think about it, you know, it's like Charles Dickens. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times. It's the best of times because that moral arc is real. As Dr. King used to like to quote, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. That quote that Dr. King gave, and that Barack Obama would say, yeah, it bends toward justice, but you got to bend it. And it is true that we're living in extraordinary times. I mean, with the nomination of Kamala Harris for president, it is mind-boggling in any measure, in any way you cut it. That a woman who a month and a half ago was so far off the radar, it made no sense to even handicap her chances for the election after this one. And then in a startling instant, her fortune changed, her fate was realigned, her destiny was transformed immediately because of the heroic political act of President Joe Biden to step aside and to allow her to move forward. And let me be clear. I was a Joe Biden fan till the wheels fell off. I didn't care because I think he still had a path to win. However, having said that, the incredible energy around Kamala Harris indicates that there is something new afoot and that we should take it seriously. On the other hand, we've got the simultaneous resurgence of Nazis walking in the streets of the city I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and calling young people the N-word. We've got the rise of the MAGAites on the far right under the influence of Donald Trump. January 6th still hovers over us, and the political chicanery and lack of courage of Republican brothers and sisters to call those folk out consistently. Immediately in the aftermath, Mitch McConnell blamed the president for fomenting an insurrection, and now he's standing beside him, and they've fallen in line. So, we are where we've always been. My pastor, Dr. Frederick Sampson, used to say, we've already, come through what we've come to. And it's good to remember that as bad as times are now, they have been equally bad, if not worse, across the board. And for me, white supremacy is a dry run for fascism. So the issues that we are confronting now have been prefigured in denying black people the right to vote, in denying African-American people full citizenship, in denying us standing in the open society, in imposing Jim Crow law upon us. These are the remnants of a fascist element in a fascist state that is now being unleashed on broad varieties of American citizens. So on the one hand, we're in an incredibly propitious moment to move forward and keep the faith and don't lose hope. And on the other hand, we face dark times, and we have to continue to gird up our loins in order to live out the true meaning, as Dr. King said, of the American dream.
It's really interesting just hearing you create that stark kind of there's pathway, and either one could happen.
Yes.
These are not crazy fantasies. This is
right.
And in some ways there's almost this I'm not sure it's a spiritual choice, but it is like it's a choice that confronts anybody who's making a choice about life. Which way do I want to go?
Yeah.
And I actually think that's very real. Like we talk about better angel, which impulse are we going to follow? And I think this is always the what we're confronted with as individuals, but even more as society. Which path are we going to follow? This is a very serious moment for the country. And so I just, as someone who has, looked at our country, but also has this deep spiritual, sensibility.
Right.
I'm curious how you understand this in almost spiritual sense.
Yeah. Choose you this day whom you will serve. I mean, it is a choice, as you say. It's not inevitable that one thing will happen or another. We've got to make it happen either way. And I'm sure we've heard this hackneyed phrase or this dogged old story about a guy looking at, a man with two dogs, and they would fight, and he would always predict which one would win. And they say, well, how do you know? He said, the one I feed the most will win that day. And the one we feed the most, the animal, the beast that we feed, is it the beast of hope? Howard Thurman, the great black mystic and teacher of Martin Luther King Jr. and inspiration, King carried Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited, in his valise across the country, along with the inspiration of the great Walter Raushenbush. And the thing is that, Thurman said, refuse the temptation to scale down your dreams to the event you are presently confronting. So don't reduce your dreams to the event you're presently confronting. He said you can be a prisoner of events, or you can be a prisoner of hope. And it is a choice. And we have to choose hope constantly, over and over again, to make certain that the choice of freedom is something we embrace, to make sure that the choice of democracy is something that we embrace. And it is a spiritual question. I like to say religion, religio, ligare, to bind together. Spirituality makes religion behave right. And this is why we need spirituality, because spirituality connects me to a cosmos, a companion who may not share my religious belief, but we are spiritual heirs of a common legacy of democracy, of truth, of justice. And that allows us as compatriots along this way to link arms, even beyond our religious differences, to have a spiritual connection to the next human being.
I thank you so much. Listen, I'm feeling very uplifted myself. You referenced someone who I admire so much, and I was lucky enough to go to seminary when he was teaching there, James Washington.
Oh, yeah.
People don't quite remember him the way they should, but he was a professor at Union when I was there. And there was a great moment when he and another historian, church historian, because James Washington was an amazing church historian.
Yes, he was.
Gifted, brilliant. And they sat down and they said, the funniest thing is some people think Walter Raushenbush was a theologian.
Right.
But he was a church historian.
Yes, he was.
And so I think and they just both shared a very fine little chuckle and a knowing chuckle. What do we know from history in this moment that we should be paying attention to? Church history, American history, history of human race. Like what's something. And I'd love it if you'd give an example of a moment that actually could instruct us positively. I mean, there's lots of moments that could instruct us negatively, but is there a moment that can instruct us positively into the future?
Yes, no, it's a great point. Look, when we look at the history, what does it teach us? Cynicism can never absorb hope. Hope is undefeated, even in the face of odds that look hopeless. Even in the face of odds that look impossible. Hope creates possibility where none exists and gives people the belief that they can continue to overcome differences and obstacles and tremendous barriers, bar none. But when I think about an example of what can happen, think about, in December 1955, Emmett Till had lost his life being lynched in Mississippi for, quote, wolf whistling at a woman. Now, his mother later revealed that he had a stutter, so the clinician said, when you feel a stutter coming on, whistle. So now what could be a pathology of speech reflects a pathology of race. The obsession with purity to punish those who would cross those lines and invade different spheres that they are not meant to touch or inhabit. He was murdered. He was lynched. And then, almost in homage to Emmett Till, in December of 1955, and then think of 56, Rosa Parks is on a bus. And Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old, yes, they said seamstress. They look back in history acting like she was an old woman. She's 42. She's young. And the older I get, the younger that look. And then she was also a social activist. It wasn't happenstance. She was looking to test the durability of discrimination laws and the effect of Jim Crow in the South. She didn't just happen upon that, but it happened on that day that when she was being mistreated by the bus driver, she took that as an opportunity to resist. No one saw that coming, and no one saw it coming that Rosa Parks' resistance would be amplified by Joanne Robinson, a teacher at Alabama State University, who then got on her mimeograph machine, and young people don't even know what that is, way even before Xerox, where you had to take a stencil with ink and then put it on a barrel and reproduce your leaflets. She got those leaflets out. E.D. Nixon, the leader of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and the NAACP working with Rosa Parks, began to take up the cause. And then a young man who had he was finishing up his doctoral dissertation at Boston University, 26 years old, was settled upon as the leader of a burgeoning movement that grew out of Rosa Parks and her resistance. His name was Martin Luther King Jr. You never know what particular gesture of resistance will then inflame the imaginations of the masses in order to transform their existence. And so things like that happen time and time and again. And then when they boycotted the buses for over a year, 90 some days, finally, when the Supreme Court decision came down, outlawing discrimination in interstate transportation, somebody hollered, God Almighty has spoken from Washington, D.C. So you never understand, know, or can predict what factors and forces will come together to create opportunities for revolutionary ideals and beliefs to manifest themselves. So our job is to stay steady. I think about in the Bible where Paul, and I don't know if it's Timothy, we're saying, look, one person plants the seed, another person waters the seed, and God is the one that makes it grow. Now you got to figure, are you a seed planter or you're a seed waterer? You got to understand, and sometimes you can be both, but often it's one or the other. Your job is to do what you're supposed to do. Plant a seed. It might be 20 years before it comes to fruition. It might be 30 years before we see the fruits of what exists. Your job might be to water that seed, to nurture the growth of an individual, an ideal, a community, an organization that will finally give fruit, that will give witness to something that is far larger than we can ever believe. So with those realities in mind, we must always be faithful to the exercise of our just obligation to do the thing that we are committed to do.
Thank you so much. And I think one of the things that just occurred to me is make a decision to grow something rather than destroy something.
That's right.
And figure out what you can grow, what you can be a part of, what spark you can offer and that other people can inflame a vision. I think it's, being a part of something and not, it all starts small. And I think recognizing this moment and hopefully we can grow something beautiful.
Right.
Dr. Dyson, I am so indebted to you. We are all indebted to you for your scholarship over the years, for your witness, for your lovely, lovely spirit. And I'm looking forward to talking to you much more in depth, but I'm so glad I got a chance to catch up with you at the DNC.
Well, it's a great honor, Reverend Raushenbush, because you have done extraordinary and exemplary work, and then to discover your lineage of your great-grandfather and what you represent. Your family is royalty to us, so anything I can do to perpetuate that legacy is my deep honor.
Oh, my goodness, you're too good. Listen, thank you so much. At the Democratic National Convention this week, I was able to catch a couple minutes with breakout congressional star Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas. I'd love to ask you how faith can be mobilized to support our democracy in this moment when it's so under attack.
You know what? So what I think is really important that we do is we stop the co-opting of Christianity specifically, because so much of this is being done in the name of quote unquote Jesus. And as I like to say, I think that this has to be the same Jesus that they used to justify slavery back in the day. And so if we don't come out and say, you know what? We are the real Christians. This is what Christianity is about. If we don't start talking about what Jesus' love really is and what it looks like, even in the form of policy, then I think that we will lose that war. I think that people will be convinced that that is the true definition of Christianity. So I think that we should talk about, when we start talking about things like work that I do as it relates to the Farm Bill and making sure that people have food to eat in the form of SNAP benefits. That's what real love and real Christianity looks like. It looks like looking out for all of us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Enjoy. Thank you so much for doing this.
Over the past few years, we've seen a lot of Americans win elections to national office for the first time. Among them is U.S. Representative Becca Balint of Vermont, the first woman and openly LGBTQ plus person to represent Vermont in Congress. Representative Balint.
Yeah.
Part of what we were talking about on the stage today was around basically Project 2025, but also how underpinnings of that are this kind of anti-LGBTQ.
Yes.
And I would say rooted in a kind of Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism that assumes, and you said it so perfectly.
Yeah.
Some people belong and some people don't belong.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit more about what that means to you also as a member of Congress? Because that's so important.
Yes. So I was thinking about it this morning when I came here to the convention, that I always wanted to be doing exactly what I'm doing right now. And it didn't seem possible for me as a gay woman. I didn't have any role models. I didn't have anyone that I could look to in elected office to say, I can be true to myself and do this work. And I get so concerned when I see that the Republican Party that used to stand for ideals around the economy, ideals around how we organize ourselves as citizens, has really just become a party of grievance and hatred And again, they get to decide who belongs and who doesn't. And so I think it speaks to, a deep lack of spirituality. Because for me, I am always thinking about where is the light in the other person, regardless of political party, regardless of background, where is the light in that person? And that is how I live my life every day in Congress. And it shows up in the way in which I may do a favor for someone across the aisle who I know has said really hateful things at other times about my community. But when I see them struggling with a door, I'm still going to open the door for them. I'm still going to help their staffer find where they're going because I see the light in them. And I think this movement, this extreme movement within the Republican Party only sees the light in people that agree with whatever their plan is. And that's just a dangerous way of existing in the world. And it's a very sad.
It's sad. And I love the way you're talking about spirituality, because also it means the light is dimmed. If you don't have everybody's light, you can't shine brightly. I just think that's a really beautiful. It's also, I think, the way, thinking about this from from a member of Congress. And I'll just say, as a Baptist minister who's gay, I also we're so blessed in some ways that we've had people who have paved the way, and yet also we have people who are trying to take away.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that I just loved about all your work is that you're really, and it's the way you ended this panel was, we're fighting. We're fighting. We're in this because we went into the fire. Yeah. That was something you said. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I had this incredible juxtaposition. So I was the first woman and first queer person ever to serve as the president of the Senate in Vermont. We'd never had someone like me in office. The day I was sworn in as president of the Senate in Vermont was the same day as the January 6th insurrection. I had just had this incredible high in my career, and I was sitting in my office in the state capitol in Vermont, and sitting there going from this incredible high to the depths of despair, watching what was unfolding on my computer screen, the insurrection at the Capitol. And essentially, at the core of that, again, is about darkness and grievance, and about there isn't room for everyone. There are some people that belong and others who don't. I can tell you, it's the queer people they're always putting in that don't belong pile, right? And so when I saw that, I thought, if there's an opportunity for me to run, I'm going to do it. I'm going to run for Congress, because it is about, honestly, for me, it is always about seeking lightness. It's about seeking joy. It's about appreciating what we each bring to our lives. And I also am very moved by the work. There's a professor named Dr. Keltner who has written a book on awe and how we experience awe. And we can sometimes experience it in church or in synagogue or at the edge of the Grand Canyon. We experience awe. But the universal experience of awe that really blows me away and I find profound is we experience awe when we see people doing something that is beyond what they thought they were capable of. It stirs us. It absolutely stirs us. And so I think about these ideas, like, how do I take that sense of awe of people inspiring me by they're doing more than they thought was possible? I think we're in that moment right now in this election. I do.
Yeah. Oh, I just love that you're talking about awe and spirit. And, there's this crazy, completely unfounded idea that the more progressive wing of politics doesn't have spirituality. It just is absolutely not true. It may not be as traditional as some, but give me that any day. One of the things you mentioned on the dais today was about your grandparents, and that you have Holocaust not survivors, that they did not survive, and so that reality that things can go bad very quickly.
Yes.
I think does underpin a lot of the, we can talk about spirit and we can talk about light, but the threat is also very real.
The threat is real. And that is, and when I was saying in the panel that democracies don't fail overnight, or mobs don't really form overnight, they're tapping into resentments and distrust and the sense that there's only so much to go around. And if they have something, then you don't. That we have to be vigilant about that in our own lives too, and how we show up around power and ego. And it was really interesting. So when we first started, so Jasmine and Max and I were on this panel together. When we started in Congress, a number of the upperclassmen said to us, you all don't seem like you're competing with each other. You are lifting each other up. We are, if somebody had a good interview, we'd post about it, or it wasn't about a finite amount of goodness. It was that we are all involved in this project together. And there's so much power in that when you don't feel alone.
Right. I mean, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the work you've done. And thank you. And have a great convention.
Thank you. So nice to meet you.
Up next, much more from the DNC in Chicago. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And make sure you subscribe at stateofbelief.com/subscribe. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush. Another highlight of my week in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention was a conversation I had with journalist Catherine Stewart, the best-selling author of The Power Worshippers: Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. All right. Well, I am here with Catherine Stewart, and I am so excited to talk to her, one of the leading scholars and thinkers and just brilliant minds around Christian nationalism, and has so much to teach us. And so, I wanted to ask you, how are you feeling? Where are we as a country in this moment? We're at the DNC, but it's a broader moment for the nation, 2024. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you seeing?
What am I seeing? Well, I think today, if you want to understand what's happening in our politics, you really need to know something about Christian nationalism. It's the movement that brought him to power in 2016. It is standing right behind him in 2024. And it's a movement that is behind, frankly, Project 2025, which is a plan for the next, if there should be, for the next conservative presidency. It's a very detailed blueprint for the remaking of our federal government. But what is Christian nationalism? I think sometimes our understanding of the movement has not kept up with the pace of the movement's shifts overall. We're really not looking, for instance, at the same movement that existed 20 years ago with the rise of the moral majority, more than 20 years ago. The movement is really sort of consolidated in a lot of regards, So I want to talk for a second about what Christian nationalism is and what's not. So Christian nationalism is not Christianity. It's not a religion, and it's not just about a few culture war issues at the margins. It is both an anti-democratic ideology, the idea that America was founded as a Christian nation, but of course, according to a very particular and reactionary idea of Christianity, and that our laws should be based on a reactionary interpretation of the Bible. It's also a movement that the ideology is really a tool for a leadership-driven, organization-driven machine that turns that story into political power. So it's exploitation of religion for politics and power. And frankly, this is a movement that, 20 years ago, the Republican Party thought they could make use of. They thought, well, they're reliable voters and we keep them a little bit to the side, but they're good, reliable partners with us. But today, the guardrails have really fallen away from the Republican Party. And in fact, the movement, this sort of anti-democratic movement, broadly speaking, has overtaken the GOP. Today, we're also seeing an alliance between the old religious right and what we call the new right, which is frankly less explicitly theocratic at its core. I think a lot of the key thinkers of the new right, of which, by the way, J.D. Vance is a product, their core values are not necessarily religious values. They're really, but they are more explicitly, overtly anti-democratic, and they just see the utility of religious nationalism and Christian nationalism in drawing what they would think of as the little people to their side.
We're staying outside of an event that's about to start called Promise 2025, and it is kind of in reaction, or just like another way of framing and not stepping into the Project 2025 frame. But what do you see as hopeful signs, or what would you like to see as hopeful signs of people really responding to Christian nationalism in this election season, but then of course beyond it?
When I started writing about this issue 15 years ago, everyone said to me, what are you talking about? Obama's the president, the rise of the nuns, the people of no particular religious affiliation, some of whom, by the way, were religious, but just didn't see their religion or spirituality reflected in this sort of public organizational way. But there were so many stories about the rise of the nuns. I remember there was a fellow who was an advisor to George W. Bush, and he said, this is a movement that could fit into a phone booth. He was talking about the religious right. Well, then the phone booth basically moved into the White House. It's like, people really dismiss this, and I think people are really aware of this movement. I think this is a movement that does not reflect the religious values of most American Christians or most American voters of faith. Who see the religion as having more to do with loving their neighbors and caring for the least of these, rather than using their religion as an excuse to discriminate against others who they don't like, or take away rights from people and impose a certain religion on school children. So I think people really recognize the challenge now. And I think there are a few things that really led to that shift. Number one, I think a lot of people were shocked when Roe versus Wade was overturned, and all of a sudden they really woke up to the issue of the courts. Movement leaders, Christian nationalist movement leaders, have long focused on the courts. Many hundreds of millions of dollars have funded a right-wing legal ecosystem that has shaped the courts. And I think a lot of folks on the outside of this movement really couldn't understand what was happening. But some of these key decisions have woken up some number of people, and they're quite shocked. And they say, well, what about my faith? What about my faith that, allows me to sort of keep my rights? I think January 6th was a big wake-up call for a lot of people. They saw religious signage and rhetoric that was all over the January 6th disgraceful attack on our Capitol. And they said that's really a form of heresy.
Yeah.
And
I think that those are two pivotal events. I've also it's just been interesting to see how religion has shown up in subtle ways. Like, people are not banging, but with Senator Warnock and with people are talking about loving your neighbor. There are some ideas that are coming up. Anyway, I just want to say thank you. We're going to check back in with you very soon on a full episode of The State of Belief. But it's so great to run into you here. I saw your panel yesterday, which was amazing, talking about religion in America. And so I just appreciate you so much, Catherine Stewart. Thank you so much for being with us.
I appreciate you too. Thank you so much. It's great to see you here.
Promise 2025 was a gathering for faith leaders and others attending the Democratic National Convention organized by Interfaith Alliance and partner organizations to brainstorm how to foster a more inclusive democracy. There's a lot of things out there and we're talking a lot about Project 2025, but we really thought it was an important moment for us to also think about the promise of 2025. Many of our traditions are actually imagining another way. And we're inspiring people and mobilizing people to imagine another way. And so we were on a call and we were just thinking like, what could we do together? And so we just decided we were going to do something called Promise 2025, a meetup, casual schmooze, get to know people. And that's what this is today. So we're going to try, and this is religious leaders are going to try to exemplify what it means to talk about the promise of 2025, our dreams, our hopes, our aspirations, what we're working for in 90 seconds, so we don't have to say everything on our minds. And as you can see, I'm a rambler, but I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm actually, no, I'm not going to. There's other opportunities for that. And so
say more about that.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about my childhood and how that happened. No, first, I just want to say thank you to Jason, Jen, Fred, Doug, myself. This came together last week. I mean, it was just enough. So it shows what we can do, and you're going to hear from each of them. I'll just say for me, the promise of 2025 is that we will know one another. Yeah. And that we will listen to one another, and that we will love one another as neighbors, as people who are destined to be with one another and who are joyful about that proposition going forward. And, this involves a policy approach, and it involves an imagination, and even more than any of that, it involves reaching out, extending a hand, and asking to walk forward together. So that for me, that's the promise of 2025 that I think we can envision. I'm going to pass it next to my brother, Fred, who will offer his.
Sure, and I'm going to be very quick. I'm Fred Davey. In addition to serving on the board of Faith Forward, which at one point was Faith 2020, I'm also on the staff of Union Theological Seminary in New York, where I was executive vice president for a number of years and now serve as a senior advisor to the president union. So just quickly for me, the birth narrative the birth metaphor is one that's very much resonating in my soul today. And that is hoping that America can really give birth to this country that we've all yearned for and dreamed for, and we've all felt was just within our grasp, but it's somehow we never can quite get there. So I'm hoping 2025 is that moment. I'm the proud great uncle of two new nephews. Literally, they're not a month old, the two of them. Just the sense of promise, and the sense of hope that comes from their birth is something that resonates deeply. So I'm hoping that we can give birth to this nation that I've longed for all of my life, and that I have seen glimpses of with various with Obama's election in 2008 and again in 2012 with things like marriage equality actually happening in with the Supreme Court and the states around the country, with the advancements that we've made on women's issues and issues related to African Americans and other people of color. But we can't seem to quite turn that corner. We can't seem to quite give birth to the fullness of what this nation can be. So I'm hoping 2025, the promise of 2025, will be that birth will be a reality, and that we can move beyond where we are now and have the community and the nation and the world that we all want and desire. Thank you. So I will turn it over to my sister, Jim Butler.
Wonderful. Yay. And I'm the Reverend Jennifer Butler. I'm the executive director of Faith Forward, alongside Fred, who's one of my bosses, many bosses on the board. And I love this idea of the image, the birth image. So my image that came to me is I was taught when I was taking Hebrew in seminary, and my Hebrew's a little rusty, so the rabbis here can correct me, but the root word for salvation is from Yeshua, liberation, to make wide or spacious. because a lot of the words in scripture are based on agricultural terms. So you can imagine like taking the fences down and making wide, making spacious so that everybody can run free, and the idea of freedom. And I just have been getting this vision today of we're up against Christian nationalism, which wants to restrict people's freedom, that wants to impose a narrow version, backwards version of Christianity on everybody else. But true religious freedom, represented in the candidates of Harris and Walz. Harris, who grew up in an interfaith situation and has an interfaith family and marriage, and Walz with his Lutheran faith, that we will model that in such a joyful, beautiful, spacious way that we, once and for all, pull people into that vision, and they just leave Christian nationalism, and Christian nationalism is no more, just evaporates.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Jason Kimmelman-Block. I'm the Washington director of NDR Jewish Action. When I think about what 2025 might be, I think about putting behind the prevalence and the politics of division and fear. Whether that's the folks who seek to divide us based on religion, dividing us on the basis of race, dividing Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians, that we move past that politics of division, and also that we move past the politics of fear, because that is how so many people build power, is through fear, and it's never good. In the Torah, there's a commandment that happens over and over again, which is not to be afraid. Israelites are told this before going into battle, but the Israelites were also taught this as they stood at the Red Sea with water in front of them and an army behind them. God said, do not be afraid. Hagar was told this when she was cast out with her baby into the desert, left to die. God said, do not be afraid. And I think part of what's deep about that commandment is we're going to be afraid at some point. There are things to fear, but we're actually supposed to fear the divine. And if we fear the divine, then we're not going to be manipulated by the people who try to make us afraid all the time. And that puts us in a place where we actually can build like the multiracial democracy that we've never experienced in this country, but constantly dream about. It can help us build a sense of safety for everyone that's not built on carceral systems or police violence, but is actually built on a sense of us all being together and in community together.
Thank you.
Hey, Paul. Hey, thanks for being here. My name is Doug Padger, Folk Common Good. To put a little more to the story that Paul told you, I don't know, a week ago or 10 days ago, we were on a call, some of us, and we said, hey, what are you all doing at the convention? And then we said to each other, like, I don't know. What's happening? Is anyone organizing religious leaders to be together? Are there any religious leader events happening? We were all like, I don't think so. And we didn't know, so we made something. And I really like that. That's part of what I hope is the promise for 2025, that we would figure out this group of we, the we's that aren't here yet, the new we's we're going to meet, what it is that we want to do. I'm pretty convinced that we need to expand our political imagination, and we need a new religious imagination in the United States. There's a lot of people who just know that if the current options of their religion, of their political vision is all there is, that it's unsatisfying. We spend a lot of time in our work traveling the country. We travel in a big bus as Faith, Hope, and Love, supporting democracy for all. In fact, here's my Harvey Milk moment. We are here to recruit you. We want you on that bus. We want you near that bus. We want you in that bus. So we'd love to take you with us on the bus. So we spend a lot of time traveling, which means we spend a lot of time buying food from Flying J's, Pilot gas stops, trucker stops. You can end up eating a certain quality of food at gas station stops and truck stops because that's all there is. A lot of people feel like the religious imagination and political imagination for them is like food at a truck stop. They're going to buy it because that's all there is, but wouldn't it be great if there was something else available? So I hope we could all put together something else available for what could exist. I think it's going to be an interfaith imagination that belongs to everyone, where people can hold closely their own religious identity or the religious identity they want. Because we talk to voters all over to introduce them to Democratic candidates, often for the first time. Many people want to expand their own religious identity. They've come to the end of what it's produced for them, and they're looking for something else. So I'd love to be involved in that with all of you, and I think that's part of what the promise of 2025 could bring.
There were many diverse, inspiring voices speaking up during Promise 2025 gathering in Chicago this week. That's just a small sample. The idea was that we were not going to let the Project 2025, with all of its warnings and dystopia, define what the future will hold. Instead, we wanted to think about the promise of 2025 and what our imaginations could lead us to. These conversations will continue both in future meetings and online. My personal takeaway from this DNC convention was wow. It was amazing how faith showed up in ways that made sense for everyone. There was no hammering over the head. There was no idea that there was one way to be religious at the DNC. In fact, there were so many different voices heard. It was beautiful, from the invocation by Rabbi Sharon Brous and the final benediction from Reverend Amos, who was the pastor of Kamala Harris's church in Oakland. We had a rich conversation about what freedom can mean, which doesn't mean freedom for me and not for you. It actually means, how do we have freedom together, where all of our freedoms are combined in such a way that no one is denigrated. I was inspired by the incredible diversity that I saw in the halls and also on the stage at the DNC. And that's the future of America. Here's the hope, is that, everyone can imagine a future where we come together. We heard a lot about Project 2025 and its dangers, and it is so dangerous. So we have to lift it up and point to it and say, that's not what we want. But what do we want? It's a different future. It's a future that promised 2025, where we come together, where we respect one another, where we actually love one another. One of the common themes that you heard across the board came directly from the idea of loving your neighbor. Former First Lady Michelle Obama mentioned it, but it was a constant refrain. What does it mean to love our neighbor in 2024 in America and then also abroad? And that's what I'm hoping that we can take away from this. Really, the imagination. What does it look like to create a more perfect union where we truly love our neighbor? And that's the hope here. And I'm walking away inspired and also challenged and hopefully fired up. I hope listening today you've heard something that touched your heart. And we are not partisan. This is not an endorsement. But I do hope that you all will vote and take part in this civic opportunity to exercise our democracy together. Please be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform, or at stateofbelief.com/subscribe. We need your help to keep making The State of Belief. Become a partner in this crucial work with financial contributions today. Information on how to donate is available at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. And share what you're getting out of this show with the people in your networks. Let's get more people listening and keep these conversations going on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at State of Belief. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Raushenbush on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.